Good afternoon and welcome to True Crime Mysteries, where we take a dive into some of the world's most prolific crimes. Welcome to part 2 of our 3-part series in the murder of Meredith Kercher. If this is your first time watching my videos, hello and welcome to the channel. Please go back and check out the first video. It is linked down below. In part 1, we went into Meredith's background, the days leading up to her murder, and the preliminary investigation. Now, we turn our attention to the results of the investigation and how that proceeded in the Italian courts. Now, I do not claim to be an expert in criminal investigation or Italian law, but as an observer and commenter, this spectacle of a trial seemed crazy to me. I have watched several documentaries, done hours of research, and I have continued to be surprised. This whole trial seemed like a media circus that was both chaotic and in some parts completely orchestrated. Evidence is wildly disputed, and I think everyone, no matter who you believe, can agree that there were more than a few questionable actions taken by the Italian police and the judicial system. On the evening of November 1st, 2007, British exchange student Meredith Kercher was brutally murdered in her home in Perugia, Italy. Following the discovery of the body, her flatmate, Amanda Knox, was photographed kissing her boyfriend. These images became a narrative that started a wildfire of media attention. People felt that she wasn't acting how one should if their friend was murdered. On November 5th, police bring in Amanda Knox and her 23-year-old boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito, in for questioning. They were separated and initially gave the same story. They were together, they had stayed in all night on November 1st, they made dinner, they smoked a joint, had adult relations, and watched a movie. They were grilled for hours by Italian police, with Sollecito breaking first, alleging that Knox had been out for most of the night. Amanda then also changed her story, confessing that she had gone back to her home with Patrick Lumumba, the owner of the bar she worked at occasionally. She claimed that Lumumba killed Kercher because Kercher had refused to have sex with him. Lumumba was arrested and all three were held on suspicion of conspiracy to commit manslaughter and sexual violence. Lumumba had a solid alibi. He had been at a bar with several witnesses all night, and Amanda later recanted her statement, so Lumumba was released and deemed innocent. This left police with a prime suspect, one who already had been caught in a lie. Following Lumumba's release, 2 weeks after being arrested, the Italian police charged Knox and Sollecito with murder despite having no evidence. They now needed to find evidence to connect the two to the crime scene. By the 19th of November, a fourth suspect was named, Guede. He was a local drug dealer and a friend of the Italian men who lived downstairs of Knox and Kercher's flat. Guede had met Meredith and Amanda from a party they had all attended weeks prior, and he had fled Perugia the morning after Kercher died, but was apprehended in Germany and questioned there. He admitted to being in Kercher's home that night and stated they had fooled around in a consensual manner. He had gone into the bathroom and had headphones in when he heard someone break in. He ran out of the bathroom without flushing the toilet and saw Kercher dying on the ground. He said he saw an Italian man that he did not know flee the scene, and Guede said that he didn't report the crime to police and fled because he feared being suspected of the murder, because innocent people flee the country all the time. And at this point, it is worth mentioning he hadn't implicated Knox or Sollecito were in the house at this time. Guede's DNA was found everywhere in the room and on Meredith's body. Months later, Guede testified that he saw Sollecito murder Kercher and heard Amanda Knox's voice in another room. This testimony was seen as him cooperating with police. Friends of Kercher also disputed his claim that he and Kercher had plans to hang out that night or ever. She was said to have been seeing one of the men who lived downstairs, and she wasn't the type to date multiple men at once, according to her friends. Her sister and mother also stated that they had never heard Meredith ever mention any Guede. Guede's lawyers asked to be tried separately from Knox and Sollecito. All three had expedited trials, and on January 16th, the trial of Knox and Sollecito began. During pre-trial and before the actual trial, the head prosecutor, Mignini, would frequently tell media pieces of evidence that proved Knox and Sollecito had murdered Kercher, like a receipt of Knox's that showed she purchased bleach. This never made it into trial because it didn't exist. He also expressed a theory that Knox and Sollecito had cleaned the room Meredith had been killed in and were able to strip the room of their DNA but leave Guede's. Not only is this impossible for two individuals to identify whose DNA is whose and be able to clean 2/3 of it and leave a third was crazy. Not only is this impossible, but he also testified this in court as a fact when it wasn't. There were many trial mishaps and a lot of evidence that hadn't been tested. The media storm was insane. Between Mignini stoking the flames by giving the media evidence, they also made sure that all suspects, particularly Amanda, were constantly seen by the media. Every movement, glance, and word spoken were hyper-analyzed. In Italy, they referred to her as the Black Widow. In the US and Britain, they preferred to call her Foxy Knoxy, which was her MySpace username, and a great soundbite. Before there had even been a trial, she was guilty by the court of public opinion. The first piece of key evidence that was investigated was the broken window. The window had a rock thrown through it, and this was supposedly how the murderer entered the villa. The Italian police are convinced that this was a staged robbery because the glass was on top of the clothing strewn on the floor. Had it been an access point, the glass would be on the floor, not the clothing, so it is speculated someone ransacked the room and then broke the window to divert suspicion. They also believe that rock had been thrown from the inside out, but that was disputed as the glass evidence didn't support that theory. The window was also 3.5 meters from the ground and, according to Italian police, was impossible to enter. However, the defense proved that this also wasn't the case. A second piece of evidence was a knife belonging to Sollecito, allegedly. It was found in his apartment, and it had Kercher's DNA on the blade and Knox's DNA on the handle. It was not a large amount of DNA, and it was likely to have been touch or transfer DNA. There was video documentation of police going into Sollecito's apartment, going to his kitchen drawer, opening it up, and out of a drawer full of different knives, they grabbed the biggest one, hold it up, and said, "We found the murder weapon." This was later discredited by the prosecutor's own expert, saying that it was too large to have been the murder weapon. Knox also said that she had used the knife that night of the murder to cut vegetables, explaining why her DNA was on the handle. Another piece of evidence used to convict was Meredith's bra clasp. It was found to have Sollecito's DNA on it. The clasp of the bra had been cut off by a knife and was the only part of the bra found to have DNA on it, meaning somehow Sollecito would have had to cut off the clasp with only touching the clasp and removing the entire bra from Kercher without touching anything else. The courts ultimately deemed this piece of evidence inadmissible because via the video documentation that police took during the whole investigation, police were seen handling the bra clasp without changing gloves, dropping it on the floor, passing it around to some officers, and some officers had no gloves at all. Sollecito's DNA could have easily been transferred from one of these officers' hands had they recently touched anything that Sollecito had touched. It is important to note that nowhere else in the entire room or Meredith's body had DNA from either Knox or Sollecito. This fact was detrimental for their ability to convict, and this infuriated head prosecutor Mignini. Mignini has gone on the record saying that he knew in his heart that Knox and Sollecito were guilty despite there being no evidence. From that very first interrogation, the Italian police were building a case based on gut intuition instead of evidence. Next were the footprints. There was a trail of footprints starting in Meredith's room and leading out the front door. These were positively identified as belonging to Rudy Guede's Nike sneakers. The others were in the bathroom and barefoot. The bathroom prints were never definitively identified, but it seemed unlikely to be Guede's. The final piece of evidence was an eyewitness who claimed to have heard a scream and then more than one person fleeing the villa. Her apartment overlooks the crime scene a little more than 200 meters away. There was a metal staircase leading to a car park in between her and the crime scene, and she claims to have heard more than one person running up these metal staircase. However, experts disputed whether she would have been capable of hearing what she thought she heard with the conditions of that night. Ultimately, Amanda Knox was convicted for the murder of Meredith Kercher and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Sollecito was also convicted and he received 25 years in prison. Amanda had received more jail time because she had lied to police when she implicated Patrick Lumumba, but she said she had only lied because she had been in a state of confusion and an officer had hit her on the head during interrogation. Rudy Guede was sentenced to 30 years, but he would later make an appeal, and in this appeal, he had alleged evidence supporting that claim that Knox and Sollecito were at the house that night. His conviction after this appeal was slashed to 16 years. This was another example of the Italian courts trying to manipulate what was available to keep Knox and Sollecito in jail for a crime that they had little to no substantial evidence to support. Keep in mind that this was a brutal murder with a substantial amount of evidence and a firestorm of media attention, a persecutor blatantly gunning for two particular people he wanted to see convicted for life, some pieces of evidence completely ignored, with other pieces so poorly blundered they could easily be disputed or discredited. But this is where we're going to wrap up part 2. We will continue with Amanda and Raffaele's appeals, releases, retrials, and legal ramifications if they are convicted a second time, as well as Rudy Guede's appeal. If you like the content, please support the channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. And if you want to stay updated on what I'm currently working on, please follow my socials. Links are in the description below. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your support greatly. Have a great day.